The Reserve Bank takes a sledgehammer to inflation, raising interest rates. In plain speak, your mortgage is probably about to get more expensive. Record food prices are enough to give you indigestion. They're up more than 7.5% on last year. Proof, the government says, that supermarket profits need to be reined in. So when's the Consumer Affairs Minister riding to the rescue? Well, he's live. Orange means straight to the dance floor, no mask required, but it's a different story for retail. And what about the classroom? Haere mai, Aussies were at the airport for some warm fuzzies, and Monty, the amazing mutt who wowed people worldwide by driving a car solo, has taken his final journey.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie. I'm Evie Ashton. The government is blaming the grocery sector for the highest annual rise in food prices in just over 10 years. Prices were 7.6% higher compared to March last year. Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark says the increase is above general inflation figures and highlights the role the grocery sector is playing driving up prices. He says the government is considering measures to rein in supermarket profits.
Considering divestment of the supermarkets is something that's in the mix in terms of those options that we could look at. We're going to look at all of the options that are available to us because this is too important. Kiwis deserve to know they're getting a fair deal at the checkout.
Next month, the government will announce its response to the recommendations from the recent Commerce Commission investigation into supermarkets. The whole country will shift to the orange traffic light setting from midnight tonight. The change means all gathering limits will be gone and customers won't have to be separated and seated to be served at hospitality venues. The Restaurant Association is hopeful the shift to the orange traffic light setting means people will be confident about going out again. The Chief Executive, Marissa Bidwa, says it's a major step forward that will help the industry to recover.
With red sort of being a heightened alert level, that also had an impact on the foot traffic that our businesses were seeing. So we're hoping with a move into orange, people will start to feel more confident about heading back out again.
Marissa Bidwa says businesses will be delighted to see so many rules dropped before Easter. The Reserve Bank has stepped up the battle against inflation with a 0.5 percentage point increase in the official cash rate to 1.5%. It's the biggest single rate increase in 22 years as the central bank decided on quicker action to get rising prices under control. Here's our business editor, Giles Beckford.
The bank's monetary committee calls the decision to go harder and faster against inflation its stitch-in-time policy. Inflation is expected to hit more than 7% next week, which the RBNZ says is partly driven by supply chain disruptions and the Ukraine war. The bank says it can't afford to let inflation get entrenched, although the economy has underlying strength and household and business finances are in good shape. But big rises now and more through the year will give it flexibility for future action amid great uncertainty.
Dozens of roads across Tairāwhiti are shut as the east coast braces for even worse weather over the coming hours. The Gisborne and Wairua districts are under a red rain warning until the early hours of tomorrow. Our Hawke's Bay Tairāwhiti reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
Trees are down over many roads across the Gisborne district and high winds are making conditions unsafe. One large slip has blocked the road to Waiho Beach, about 40 minutes northeast of Gisborne. All unsealed roads across the district are now closed to heavy vehicles. State Highway 35 is shut in two places between Te Puia Springs and Tokomaru Bay and Hicks Bay and Te Araroa. The rain in Wairoa is heavier this afternoon, causing surface flooding and slips, with one bringing 2 trees down.
Gisborne District Council data shows the East Cape Lighthouse has been the wettest place in the region, reaching nearly 190 millimetres of rain in the last 24 hours. Ruatoria has seen nearly 180 and Te Puia about 170 millimetres. In Hawke's Bay, Aniwaniwa Park near Lake Waikere-Moana has seen 92.5 millimetres today. And the Defence Force is confident the ageing Hercules plane sent off to Europe is capable of doing the job. This morning, a C-130 left Auckland with 9 Air Force staff on board to help move aid to Ukraine. All 5 C-130s are over 50 years old and will be retired in the next 2 years. At one point in 2019, all were grounded for maintenance or upgrades. Air Force Auckland Base Commander Andy Scott is sure the plane is up to the job as it has been brought up to 2022 standards. To sport. And relief is the overriding emotion for Netball New Zealand after confirmation of the shift to a COVID orange light setting from midnight. With Super Rugby and international cricket all back to full houses, Netball's ANZ Premiership had remained limited to 200 spectators under the red setting because of being played indoors. Netball New Zealand's Chief Executive Jenny Wiley says being able to drop crowd restrictions will make the world of difference.
To be able to have the noise, the excitement, to be able to look after our partners and to allow the athletes to have their family and friends with them. I think it just makes such a big difference, and it certainly will help the team financially as well.
The Phoenix play bottom of the table Perth Glory tonight, their 6th game in 19 days and last before heading home after being based in Australia all season. Coach Ufuk Talay employed a 5-strong defensive lineup in their last match, a 4-1 win over Western Sydney, but it's something he's loath to do regularly.
I don't like having an extra player at the back. I'd rather have an extra player up the top that's going to score us a goal and not let the opponent have the ball. I've worked very hard to move this team away from this underdog tag, mate. We're not underdogs. We can play football. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong.
The Phoenix will play their first game back in Wellington on Sunday when they host the Central Coast Mariners. And White Ferns all-rounder Melly Kerr and Black Caps batsman Will Young have been named New Zealand Cricket's One-Day Players of the Year. That's the news.
New Zealand troops head to Europe.
Only 9 of 50 staff are travelling on board, and the other 41 are actually heading over on commercial aircraft.
Boris Johnson is fined for his COVID birthday party.
In all frankness, at that time, it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach of the rules.
While in rain-drenched Tairāwhiti, they're still seeing the bright side.
It's just wiped everything out again. So, yeah, we're stuck in paradise. Even on a bad day, it's still a paradise to me.
With you, whatever the weather. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Former cyclone Feli is moving to the east of the North Island, bringing gales and heavy rain to eastern areas. For Northland, Auckland and Waikato, fine apart from isolated showers for Northland until tomorrow morning. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Remaining rain is gradually clearing from the west today and southwesterly gales are easing. Fine tomorrow. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls, localised downpours and possible thunderstorms. Southwesterly gales, possibly severe in exposed places, becoming fine tomorrow with winds gradually easing. From Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumarunui, Taihape and Wairua, isolated showers but scattered rain in Taihape and Wairua. Southerly gales and exposed places are easing this evening, becoming fine tomorrow. Looking at the South Island, for Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, partly cloudy, isolated showers in Fiordland and along the coast, and mainly fine for the remainder of the South Island. Looking at Rekuhu, the Chatham Islands, rain, possibly heavy with thunderstorms tomorrow. Southerly gales tomorrow afternoon and evening. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Is the cost of food giving you a bellyache? Well, figures released today show prices are up 7.6% on the same time last year, the biggest jump in more than a decade. More on that shortly, but first, your mortgage is probably about to cost you more too, after the Reserve Bank took a sledgehammer to inflation. This afternoon, it raised the official cash rate 0.5 percentage point to 1.5%, meaning you'll pay more to borrow money. It's the 4th consecutive jump since October, and be warned, there's more to come. The bank's goal is to keep inflation between 1% and 3%, but it's romping ahead at almost double that. And joining us now is Kiwi Bank Chief Economist Jared Kerr. Kia ora, Jared. What's going to happen to the average mortgage as a result of this?
Kia ora. Well, the average mortgage is going to go up. We've seen mortgage rates go up about 2% already. And we've just seen the RBNZ take a sledgehammer to inflation, as you said. and raised the cash rate another 50 basis points today. So mortgage rates are on the rise.
In real money, what will households experience then?
Well, like I said, we've seen about a 2% increase in mortgage rates already. So on an average mortgage of about $700,000, that's getting up there around $15,000 a year extra repayments. So it's definitely hitting households and hitting household budgets.
That's a big wodge of cash when also they are faced with the rising cost of food and other things due to inflation.
Yes, agreed.
Are people going to start getting in trouble, Jared?
Potentially some, yes, but not all. The good news here is that we've got a very tight labour market and wages are rising. But it doesn't mean that they won't have to rein in their spending.
So how aggressive do you reckon this move is by the Reserve Bank, and did they need to come out this hard?
I don't think they needed to come out this hard, no. We've seen a drop in consumer confidence and we've seen a drop in business confidence, which worries me. But they have decided that they want to get on top of inflation and inflation expectations, and they've come out with the sledgehammer. That does worry me, though, about how households will react and cope with the increased costs.
When you say it worries you, what do you mean? That people are going to hunker down and we could be staring down the barrel of a recession?
I wouldn't go as far as saying we're staring down the barrel of a recession, but I would say that households are going to find it tougher, particularly with rising mortgage rates, other lending rates, and the rising cost of living that we're going through. I mean, the price of petrol is one thing, but there's broad-based cost pressures coming through via food and housing-related costs.
Is this move going to make a material difference? Is it short-term pain for long-term gain?
That is exactly what I think the Reserve Bank wants. I think they want to front-load their rate hikes, get a lot of them done now, get it out of the way so that they don't have to do as much later down the track. So, yes, I think that's exactly what they're trying to engineer.
But there is more coming down the pipe, isn't there, Jared? Because the bank has the position that a neutral rate is between 2 and 2.5%. We're a wee way off that, and potentially they're going to go further. What are your expectations?
Yeah, we expect them to deliver another 50 basis point hike in May, so that'll take the cash rate to closer to neutral of 2%, as you said. But they actually think they need to go through neutral and into tight territory to actually restrict the economy. So they're saying that they're going to tighten the cash rate to 3.25%. So if they do that, then clearly there's more upside to mortgage rates.
Okay, and when you talk about the upside to mortgage rates, like if you looked at last year's mortgage rates, you could get something around 2.2% for a shorter time frame, right? What do you reckon it's going to be by the end of the year for, say, a 3-year fixed-term mortgage? What do you reckon the rates are going to be?
It'll be closer to 6%, in my opinion. So the record low interest rates that we had last year were just that. They were record low. They were put in place as an emergency. We're coming back to something more normal now. And I think your older listeners will think of a mortgage rate of around 5-6% as being more normal. And I think that's where we're headed. Is
there any chance we could get into the double digits?
I hope not, and I certainly don't think so, not based on the interest rate sensitivity of our economy at the moment.
Jared, you mentioned wages in passing, right? At the moment, they are not keeping pace with inflation. So what do you think is going to happen given that we're basically, everybody who wants to be employed pretty much is?
No, that's right. So wages have not kept up with inflation. We do expect wages to grow at a faster clip this year. We do expect there to be some payback and for wages really to accelerate over the second half of the year.
Could you put a percentage on it, Jared?
Yeah, we see wages rising from around 3% now to up to around 4.5-5% by the end of the year, which is quite a fast clip for wage growth.
Really appreciate your time, Jared. Thanks for joining us. That's Jared Kerr, who is Kiwibank's chief economist. It is almost 14 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Say goodbye to having to stay seated and separated at a bar or restaurant, and hello to hospitality as we used to know it. The whole of New Zealand will move to orange from midnight tonight, with the main change to the rules for indoor gatherings. Gone is the 200-person limit, the seating and separated requirements, and the need to wear a mask. The advice for older students at school will also change from having to wear a mask to being encouraged to. But mask use will still be compulsory at a range of places, including flights, public transport and retail. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
While there are still thousands of new cases and deaths to report each day, ministers have made the call to loosen the rules.
Right across the country, the evidence is clear that the actions we have sustained mean that we're now coming off the peak and we're now well on the other side of it.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says progress is being made.
In some places, the cases are falling off quickly. In others, they're plateauing and experiencing a slightly slower decline, but the overall picture is a very positive one.
Under Orange, there are no indoor or outdoor gathering limits, but there was confusion as the minister struggled to spell out the updated rules for masks.
I'm just waiting for the absolute list to come through, just because I don't want to give people guidance that is incorrect. I acknowledge that the script that I used probably wasn't as clear as it should have been, so I don't want to go into specific situations. So just give me a minute to get the full list through, and then I will go through the full list of when it is and isn't required.
And then contrition.
That was my mistake. I did not refresh my memory sufficiently about mask requirements at Orange. Before I came down here, I apologise for that. That was my mistake. The guidance is very clear. I will accept responsibility for the fact that I did not do that. There's been quite a lot going on.
National's Chris Bishop says the move to Orange is positive.
Well, look, National welcomes the move down to Orange, but frankly, we think it's time to get rid of the traffic light framework altogether.
Adding Chris Hipkins' performance reflects a big problem.
It's become deeply confusing, and as the Minister himself demonstrated, he doesn't even understand the rules himself.
ACT leader David Seymour says the rules treat New Zealanders like infants.
We are strapped in the back, waiting at the broken traffic light, asking when we can finally be free.
Chief Executive of the Restaurant Association, Marissa Boudoir, says it's great news.
We were very, very pleased to hear that this is happening. It's a huge relief for the hospitality industry, which continues to struggle under the red level restrictions.
The Greens co-leader James Shaw says New Zealand should have stayed in red.
Until we get those vaccination rates up to the point where we can truly say we've got an equitable vaccination program.
But here are the updated rules. Older students at school will no longer have to wear masks inside, but will be encouraged to under Orange. Those 12 and over will still have to wear a mask on the school bus. Masks are still compulsory on domestic flights and public transport, including taxis and ride shares. You'll still need a mask in retail stores, including pharmacies, supermarkets, petrol stations and malls, and when visiting public venues like museums and libraries. Masks are also a must at healthcare or aged care facilities. While they are required in these places, they're not in large hospitality venues like pubs and clubs. Prompted by a reporter's question about people cozying up on the dance floor, Chris Hipkins addressed the apparent contradiction.
Ultimately, it's a question of volume. There are going to be a lot more people in the supermarket on a weekly basis than there'll be out and about pashing on a dance floor.
Loosening the rules for masks at school also conflicts with calls from leading epidemiologists who'd prefer to see them kept as a requirement for now. A view backed by James Shaw.
It is ripping through schools, and that's partially because of the low vaccination rate, particularly that second shot amongst school children. So it is really concerning.
Vaughan Quio from the Secondary Principals Association says it makes sense to let schools decide if mask wearing should remain mandatory. He says some are still in the thick of COVID, but others, like his own school, Papatoetoe High, are coming out the other side.
We've got 95, 96% vax rate in our area. We've got very high vaccination rates. And we're only getting a trickle of cases coming in each day now at school. It appears that in my context, it seems sensible to start thinking about relaxing those restrictions.
The new rules are in place from midnight tonight. The next review of the orange settings will be in mid-May.
The arrival gates have been flung open today to welcome Australians who've been able to travel freely to New Zealand for the first time in more than 2 years. For some, it was a long-awaited family reunion. Airport arrivals halls filled with hugs and warm fuzzies. Our reporter Louise Tanuth joins us now from Auckland Airport. Louise, what's it been like there?
That's right, Lisa. Well, it's been an emotion-filled day here at Auckland Airport today. There's been many reunions between friends and family, some of them waiting several years for today. There's been hugs, there's been kisses, there's even been tears. The airport has really seen it all.
Oh, glad to be back, and I'm so excited. I can't believe that I'm here. It's just so excited. I missed everything. I even missed Air New Zealand lollies, and I picked 4 of them today. It's just like, I can't believe that I'm here. I'm just so excited.
Bittersweet. I've been waiting so long to get here, but it's amazing. Since October last year. Yeah, I tried to get over here to visit my grandfather before he passed. Didn't make it, but here for emotional support for my grandmother and my auntie. So it's awesome. Yeah.
I've been away living in Russia for the last 2 years. Yeah, so with everything going on, I had to get out of there. I actually moved to Australia about 6 days ago. And now I've come back just to see my family for 2 weeks.
So they don't know you're coming?
No.
We're waiting for our daughter and granddaughter from Sydney, and we haven't seen them for nearly 4 years. So it's a really special day for us.
Been too long, way too long. Yeah, we've had 3 trips cancelled, so we're glad to be finally home.
So, Louise, some pretty excited, happy people there. I mean, how many were coming in? What was the volume like?
So when we arrived, we saw 3 huge flights. Now, they were from Melbourne and Sydney, and they were all fully booked. So from our trip alone, we saw around 600 people through those doors. There's several flights that are scheduled to arrive tonight. So that's another several flights here today. Now, some of them have been delayed, so there's still a crowd behind me waiting for their own reunion. But all up, around 18 flights Air New Zealand expects to arrive in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch today. And to meet that huge demand, they have upped 20,000 extra seats from now until June. And so there seems to be really huge demand, really big numbers so far. Everyone's keen to be reunited.
And Louise, for those people who are listening rather than watching, I can see over your shoulder there are quite a few people sitting there waiting patiently. And I mean, what is the airport itself like? It's been dead for a couple of years. Can you buy a coffee there? Can they go to duty free? What's the deal?
Well, it's still far from bustling, to be quite honest. I'd say there's about a third of places open at a push. Now, that's retail and cafes. And having a chat to some of those owners, they've told me that they put that down to staffing issues. So they're dealing with people that either have COVID or are household contacts. So for them, really disappointing. They've been waiting for today as well, but of course it's still a real struggle for them. They're hoping to really ramp things up, though, now that more tourists come through those doors.
Thanks, Louise. That is Louise Tanuth at Auckland Airport there. If your growing grocery bill induces indigestion, figures out today confirm the biggest jump in food prices in more than a decade. Proof, the government says, that supermarket super profits need to be reined in. Food prices have gone up 7.6% in the past year, the largest increase since July 2011. Break it down further, and fruit and veg is up 18%, meat, fish and poultry up 8.7%. Commerce Minister David Clark's reaction's been swift, with a press release calling out grocery retailers making double the profits they should and saying the government will take action to stop it. And he joins us now. Kia ora, Minister, what are you going to do?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, as you've seen, the figures out today do highlight the fact that the grocery sector plays a role in driving up prices. It's the prices in the sector and the inflation is higher than the general inflation, and that highlights the need to make sure that we follow through on the Commerce Commission's recommendations. As I said when I received that report last month, we will consider those recommendations. We've accepted the findings that the sector is not providing workably competitive market, and I've also said that I will consider going further than their recommendations when we examine them if we think it's necessary.
Okay, so what options are out and what are still on the table?
Well, so obviously the actual work is being done right now on that 607-page report, and I'll take the findings of that to colleagues. I'm not about to announce the government's response right now, but I can tell you that I think we do need to follow up on the Commerce Commission's recommendation that we look at banning covenants on land. The supermarkets have already accepted that they don't want to enforce those. Well, I want to make sure that that has the force behind it that it needs. A mandatory code of conduct for supermarkets, and particularly in the way they deal with the suppliers and how they present their prices to customers is something I think we need to look at as well. And having a regulator that oversees how the supermarkets work. And I think that the final one that I'd highlight is access to wholesale supply. That is one of the more powerful recommendations I see from the Commerce Commission, and I think we need to dig into that.
OK, Minister, so those are the things you like from the report, but you said that you could go further than the report. So is forcing supermarkets to divest some of their assets, is that a real possibility?
It's certainly something that I want to explore, Lisa. I'm being really open about that.
Do you favour it?
Look, I think the Commerce Commission was clear that some options will not work. That is not one that they said would not work. I think they just had not, within the time frame, we set them a tight time frame because we wanted to get this piece of work done. They had not worked through all the costs and benefits of it, and there is a lot of detail to pick through. So
do you favour it though, Minister?
On a surface level, on a surface examination, having more significant players in the grocery retail sector is a good thing. Whether that's best achieved by dividing up what's there now or seeing new players come in or existing players expand, I think is an open question.
So what are you waiting on in terms of making a decision?
I'm waiting on the advice from officials as they work their way through that 607-page report from the Commerce Commission, because I want to have a concrete plan for the way forward, and that'll be something I'll be announcing, I expect, at the end of this month.
Given the price of groceries and the figures
end of next month, I should say, Lisa.
Yeah, so given the price of groceries, right, and the figures announced today, some people simply cannot afford to wait. And a lot of the recommendations that you are looking at are long game things, you know, like caveats on land use and mandatory codes of conduct for supply chain relations. They will take time to filter down. So, you know, what's the fastest people can expect from what you're going to do to see a difference in the bill at the checkout?
I think some of the things we're seeing already, the work on a code of conduct, that conversation has already begun with supermarkets. I've already written to them asking them to look at unit pricing, which will help consumers at the checkout decide which things are going to be
It doesn't change the price of the goods, though,
And-
does it, Minister?
and
It just
the other
simply
thing-
tells you in a simple form how much it costs. It doesn't actually make it cheaper. So in terms of making it cheaper, what are some fast fixes that you can do right now?
Well, I think one of the things we've seen already is that if we change the nature of conditions in the market, people do come to the table. Costco has already been clear that it's coming into New Zealand now. It sees the conditions for a competitive arrival are now there. And that, you know, I don't imagine that the Commerce Commission report had nothing to do with that. I also note that this week the warehouse has been letting people know that it's got butter at considerably cheaper price than other places, and also milk down at $3 for 2 litres. These changes in the market are starting to happen. The competitors are seeing an opportunity here, and these profits that the supermarkets have been making have been playing out over a long period of time. I think we're in for an interesting time ahead, and I do think that those who are in the market now need to sharpen their game.
Minister, what did your last grocery shop cost you?
Well, it was about, I would guess, about $40 here in Wellington when I went out on Monday night to gather some supplies.
You're a cheap date then, Minister. Thanks for joining us. That is David Clark, the Consumer Affairs Minister there. Homai o whakaaro. We would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What do you make of food prices? That's a considerable increase, almost 8% up from the previous year. And mortgage rates too. The Reserve Bank has put up the OCR today, which means that's going to trickle down into how much you're paying on home loans. Text me, pātui mai, how are you getting by? 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. To the east coast now, where Wairua has been drenched and the rain is still falling. The rain set in as the day dragged on, with locals still recovering from the storm just 3 weeks ago. Our reporter Rosie Gordon and Sam Rillstone have the story.
Gumboots on and ready for the rain, Wairua locals we spoke to were getting ready to hunker down.
Makes us nervous as well with everything that's happening with the last lot of rain we got and stuff like that, but we're prepared. We've flipped our trampoline over and tied everything down that we don't want flying away.
Anahera Kahukura says their place in town was hit hard by a storm 3 weeks ago and they're still dealing with the aftermath.
Turned our bathroom walls into sponges and our backyard into a lake. So we've bounced back from it pretty good. It actually caused rats to come into our house, which they then chewed our electricals in our kitchen and things like that. So we're still actually trying to bounce back from our last storm.
Liz Baxter lives rurally. She's hoping slips won't close a key road like last time, blocking her from getting into town.
Luckily we were away for 2 weeks when it happened last time, but come back and then we actually get stuck out there because the road's closed. So just hoping that the roads are going to handle another download of this.
This time Ms Baxter has stocked up.
Just extra food if we do get stuck. We've got a generator now, so if the power goes, we've got the generator there.
Farmers moved stock today after farms were soaked last time around. Fed farmers said things weren't too bad earlier, but Wairua Mayor Craig Little says the rain will be tough for farmers.
A little bit depressing on those farms that have been, mainly farms have been really hit hard with slips and roads out and things like that, access tracks and that. And then seeing it starting to come down a gear where they think it's just drying out.
Part of today's preparation for ex-cyclone Feely included bringing reinforcements in to hold up a rural bridge. These two bulldozers are reinforcing this bridge near Tiringa Falls. Piles under the bridge moved in that storm 3 weeks ago. The rain got heavier in the afternoon, causing surface flooding and slips. One brought 2 trees down. Mayor Craig Little has a simple message for a community now used to the rain.
Keep in touch with your whānau, your loved ones, your neighbours, and make sure you're all looking after each other. Have plenty in your cupboard, so if a few days you're locked up or 3 or 4, we might lose power. So look after everybody, and we've been through this before, we'll go through it again.
With a red rain warning in place until 4 a.m, the people of Wairua are hoping the wet weather moves on soon.
And if you were listening to that story from Rosie and Sam on radio, do go online and check out the video and see the level of damage they're talking about. Kia ora e te iwi e Hariakine e checkpoint. Ram raids are on the rise, driven it seems by thrill-seeking young people looking for social media content, cigarettes and booze. As the COVID traffic light flicks to orange, schools are left to make their own minds up about masks in class. And amazing Monty, the SPCA mutt smart enough to drive a car, is gone too soon. Homai o whakaro, do send us your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
An economist says the Reserve Bank has come out with a sledgehammer by raising its benchmark interest rate by 0.5 percentage point to 1.5%. Kiwibank's chief economist Jared Kerr told Checkpoint he's worried about how households will cope with increased mortgage rates and the rising cost of living. He expects another 50 basis point hike in May. Nationals leader is calling on the government to rein in spending to help curb rising food prices. Christopher Luxon says the government shouldn't just rely on interest rates to control inflation. Principals say schools should decide if children must wear masks in the classroom, with some schools in the thick of COVID while others are coming out the other side. The move to the orange traffic light level announced today removes the government's mask mandate for children in years 4 and above. Meanwhile, the head of the Restaurant Association, Marissa Bidwa, has told Checkpoint that the removal of rules separating and seating customers is a huge relief for the industry. Dozens of roads across Tairāwhiti are shut as the east coast braces for even worse weather over the coming hours. The Gisborne and Wairua districts are under a red rain warning until the early hours of tomorrow. Christchurch's St George's Hospital says it won't rush into a decision about the future of its maternity unit. About 150 midwives, mothers and their supporters marched to the hospital to hand-deliver a petition with more than 30,000 signatures to save the unit from closing. And the police say New Zealand is experiencing a spate in ram raid burglaries, mostly carried out by young people. Luxury stores Louis Vuitton and Gucci were hit on Queen Street in central Auckland on Monday, and a dairy in the city was ram raided, while Waikato police have arrested 80 people since launching an investigation in February. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Kia ora rā, Evie, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa in nei, ko Nona Peltier, who's here to talk business. Nona, some of the big news of the day. The Reserve Bank has raised the official cash rate. What's been the reaction?
Yeah, it's been kind of interesting, as people may have heard earlier, Jared Kerr from Kiwi Bank said that the Reserve Bank had taken a sledgehammer to the official cash rate by raising it to 1.5% today. That was a gain of 50 basis points. The market was thinking 25 basis points, maybe 50. And so the shock value was the 50. But when you started reading the fine detail, you could see that it was a little bit more dovish than the initial reaction. So what happened to the dollar was the Kiwi rose quite sharply initially, so hitting above 69 cents US. But then as you started reading through it and started pondering a bit, the economists and the market kind of reassessed their position. And the Kiwi dollar, it fell back to 68.2 US cents because while it's all said and done at the moment, it looks like the Reserve Bank is staying on its track to normalize interest rates, say around 2%. At this stage, all it's doing is really giving itself more wiggle room depending on what happens next. And as we know, the economists have had a hard time predicting what happens next in these COVID days because it's full of surprises, isn't it?
Sure is, Nona. And the country's banks are likely to find it tougher to post the record-breaking profit growth of recent years. Now, why is that?
Yeah, now that's an interesting one too. So there was a report by KPMG. It's a sector review. It showed that the profits of the banks were up in the last 3 months, but that it's going to get a little bit harder for the banks in the future to make as much money. And that's partly because of where we are in this cycle right now. We've had those low interest rates. The economy seemed to be booming along. People had money in their pocket. Some people were paying their loans down faster. That's not likely to happen now because, of course, interest rates are going up. So the bank sector is going to probably see things looking a bit tougher for them too. So what's going to happen is people will perhaps take longer to pay down those loans. The higher rates, tighter lending rules, and so on means that investors and lenders might not want to borrow as much. And so that's going to affect banks in the long run, if that makes people feel any better, because there was a consumer report out today as well that basically said that most people are unhappy with the performance of the banking sector and there should be more monitoring to keep them in line.
And Nona, let's take a trot around the markets.
All right. So the index closed down only 14 points to 11,875. And the New Zealand dollar, again, steady at 68.2 US cents. That's where it started the day after that 69 cent climb. 91.6 Australian and 52.4 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with business news. The border's now open to Australians, but some traditional tourist towns have some recovering to do after a bruising couple of years. The head of Rotorua's Economic Development Agency fears tourists will be put off visiting. Andrew Wilson says some of his town's motels are now seen as an investment, snapped up by out-of-towners who run them as lucrative emergency housing. But tenants and operators in Rotorua question where else local homeless would go if not for the town's emergency accommodation. Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Mana is my mountain and Aroha my sea.
Roy knows what it's like having nowhere to go. He stops strumming, packs up his perch on Tutanekai Street and starts telling us his story. He recently spent 8 months in emergency housing not far from here after being evicted from his flat.
I could handle it. I don't know how these families were doing, because sadly a lot of them would never come out of their rooms. And then again if you got a family in there with 5 kids or 4 kids or something, and they step out of their motel room where they got to play, in the car park, where you can't play.
His recent struggles are indicative of a wider problem here in Rotorua, the tourism mecca in the midst of a very visible struggle playing out along some of its main streets. The council's economic development arm believes at least 35 motels are being used as emergency housing. It fears reputational damage to Rotorua as borders open and tourists flood back in. But Roy has a question.
If that is the problem, where are you going to put them? That's the reality.
Andrew Wilson heads Rotorua Economic Development. It's a council-controlled organisation, but Mr Wilson is far from your usual guarded local government officer.
Motels are changing hands, and we do come across new moteliers that has become a bit of an investment class. We've probably described it a little bit as kind of domestic poverty tourism in terms of, and it's not unique just to Rotorua. Certainly the Hawke's Bay, Hamilton. There's plenty of other regional parts of New Zealand that have kind of got the same issues.
One of his key concerns is motels that double dip, hybrids offering emergency housing while also taking bookings from tourists.
The greatest fear is the motel operators that continue to try and have a bob both ways. So we know there's a smaller cohort of around about 10 that continue to advertise on the OTAs in terms of booking.coms and Expedias of the world, as well as receiving emergency housing clients. And certainly from our perspective, that's not the kind of visitor experience we're looking to deliver.
But there's a much wider issue at play here, one everyone interviewed for this story wants to see change, more suitable long-term accommodation for those in need.
You'd only have to look at the number of houses that are projected to be built by in Rotorua, in terms of public housing, and certainly the number of people that are sitting in emergency housing at the moment would far exceed that. So, we've got a real mismatch even in terms of what the ambitions are.
So we take a drive down Fenton Street, the main drag. There are clear signs of social issues here. There's gang colours, security guards stationed in driveways, wardens in fluoro vests patrolling the street, alcohol, unkempt sites. We drop in on one motel, asking to talk to the owner, but he's based in Auckland, we're told. So we arranged to meet Emmeline Dubose instead, who tells us she owns numerous commercial buildings in town, including one on Amahu Street, where she runs Spa Lodge.
A lot of people, they say negative things about homelessness, They will always say it's trouble, hard to manage, all those things. But for me, it's more of compassion.
Emmeline lives locally and she doesn't run a hybrid operation, only accepting emergency housing tenants. The motel, well, it's tired, but clean and tidy compared to some we've seen. Emmeline tells me she runs a tight ship.
I normally tell them, whatever shit you want to do it outside. It's none of my business. Once she comes into the door, definitely it's now my business. You can come drunk, you can come high, but as long as you don't do it on my property, I'm fine with that.
So what does she make of all the noise? Reports of social issues associated with emergency housing, fears of reputational damage due to mixed use, claims of domestic poverty tourism.
So we have to balance everything to make it work, But where will this go? It's anybody's guess, because at the end of the day, we don't have enough housing. That's the biggest one. And where are these people going?
Her motel appears relatively busy when we visit. Her managers, a few tenants, watch on as we talk. Compare that crowd to the relative quiet of Aura Accommodation, run by Nick Fitzgerald, head of the Rotorua Association of Motels, one of those who remains focused purely on the tourism market.
Where we've seen and had success in Rotorua with managing emergency housing is when entire properties have been contracted. And when they have been entirely contracted, then the wraparound services have been provided. And ultimately there's been really good outcomes for individuals, but the wider community as well.
Like Mr Wilson, there's a picture Nick Fitzgerald fears most. The family arriving from, say, Sydney, sat at a motel surrounded by social issues that are associated with emergency accommodation.
We completely understand we've got families in Rotorua that fall into a position where they need emergency housing, and we want to make sure that we're supporting those people. But we want to make sure that we're supporting those people in a way that's not causing wider damage to our reputation.
So, as the country opens up, Rotorua's struggle to find a balance continues. Housing for the homeless and for the holiday.
The Ministry of Housing and Urban Development told us about 220 new public homes are under construction, all being planned in Rotorua. Meanwhile, Mike Bryant, who is MSD Regional Commissioner for Bay of Plenty, says the majority of Rotorua motels are not mixed use. However, he says moteliers supplying non-contracted emergency accommodation are free to decide who they let their units to. A lot of you are getting in touch about the cost of groceries, food in particular, and we did an interview with the Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark. He said his last shop cost him $40 at the supermarket. Lloyd's got in touch to say, what did the Minister get? A pound of butter and a loaf of bread? Belinda from Christchurch says just paid $329 for 4 bags of groceries at New World. Very few Easter eggs in there, she says. And someone else says no wage growth for most public service people for another 2 years. Really kind, says Anthony from Hamilton. And another listener's got in touch to say David Clark really should not be a minister. He will have no effect on prices in supermarkets. And Steve says short answer for rising prices at the supermarket is to buy your basics from the warehouse. They are just ripping us off whilst the government does nothing. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on the text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Police believe a rush on ram raids is being driven by young thrill seekers looking for social media content, booze, vapes and cigarettes. On Monday, luxury Queen Street stores Louis Vuitton and Gucci had their shop windows smashed with a stolen vehicle, but police say they didn't get any goods. And last week, an Auckland dairy was ram raided. The driver of the vehicle was just 11 years old and one of 9 young people involved. Waikato police have recovered $100,000 in stolen goods and arrested 80 people since launching a special investigation into smash and grabs in February. Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers explains ram raids are on the rise.
Well, we've certainly seen an increase in ram raid style burglaries. To the year ending October, actually 2021, we had about 283 across the country, and that is an increase on the previous 12 months.
That seems like a hell of a lot.
Yes, it is a concern to us. We're noticing some trends with these style of burglaries, particularly young people being involved, stolen cars being involved, social media being a platform which many of them are using to communicate with each other, and obviously the sorts of products that they're focused on, things like alcohol, cigarettes, vape equipment, so that is a real concern to us.
That's really interesting stuff. So let's start with the social media, right? Are they hooking up with other people to do the crimes with them via social media, or how does that work?
Well, we sense that there's a bit of a thrill aspect here for some of them, which is a shame, the decisions that they're making. And yes, the connections that they have with each other is often through social media, and there's a range of platforms that they are using to communicate, and also actually, in some cases, to film what they're doing, which at times is not unhelpful to us.
So last week, there was 9 young people involved, I think it was, in a ram raid. The driver was 11 years old. Is that unusual?
That's certainly a concern. What we're seeing here too is that of the ram raid style burglaries that we've observed, 88% of the offenders are under 20 years of age, and the majority of those offenders under actually 17 years of age. So we're seeing young people of all ages, and of course, especially when we're talking 11, 12, 13-year-olds, which we're observing, that's a real concern to us. The decisions that these young people are making are something that we are concerned about, and so should the community. And that's why we are working so hard to address this issue.
Yeah, that's youth court age and youth aid we're talking here. Do you think the young people know that?
Well, we of the offenders that we've identified, and it's important for me to say that of the ram raids that we've seen over the last 12 months, we have identified offenders for 42% of those events, which is high, and we're happy with that, but we need to keep working hard because we want it to be even higher. Now, of that 42%, about 40% of them have been referred for youth aid action, and about 60% have been prosecuted, so have ended up either in district courts or youth courts. So we are considering a range of options to address the behaviours. The other thing I need to point out too, though, is that we appreciate, yes, the crime is not something that we or the community should tolerate, But there are other issues that sit in behind this offending, and staff are telling me that there are some complex issues with many of these young people, and that's why it's not just a police problem. We seek the help of others to address these issues.
Are they doing it off their own bat for themselves? You know, some of the things you're talking about that are being taken, vapes, booze, normal cigarettes, this kind of stuff, are they pinching it for themselves, or is someone else asking them to do it? For example, gangs.
Yeah, no, our observations are that we believe that many of the products that these individuals are stealing are for themselves, or in some cases high-end products that they may be able to sell easily, get some cash for, to perhaps feed other habits, be it alcohol or drugs. So we aren't seeing prevalence of gangs in behind this sort of offending. We're talking about young people who are more focused on things, we think, for themselves.
So, Richard, you wouldn't characterise it as organised crime as such? There's not a group of young people who are doing this over and over again?
There is certainly a high proportion of people who are recidivist, and that is something that we take into account when we consider the best options to deal with that offending. And that includes under Oranga Tamariki and youth justice options available to us. But we've also got to look beyond that and understand, well, what is it that's driving this behaviour, that's connecting these people with each other to offend like this? And we are seeing family harm being an experience of many of these young people, or alcohol and drug abuse. So that is what the sorts of things that we actually have to be also mindful of when we decide the best course of action to try and prevent further offending.
The 42% clearance rate for ram raids doesn't seem high, I have to say.
Well, we always aspire to get that much higher, but, we also appreciate, the last couple of years for police, like everybody else in our country, has been extraordinary, but we continue to work very, very hard to do our best for the community, to get the results that they deserve and take the right courses of action. So we keep working hard to improve on that.
And that's Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers there. Monty, the adorable, amazing mutt that literally drove a change in the way people think about rescue pups, has died suddenly. Monty and two other SPCA dogs were taught to drive a mini car to prove abandoned and abused dogs are smart too. And Monty did it live on TV, and he didn't just go around a racetrack. The story of Monty went around the globe. Let's take you back to that moment in 2012.
Good boy, Monty, wait. Good boy, good dog.
So basically now he's got his foot on the accelerator, his right foot on the accelerator.
Wait.
He's steering with his left hand.
His paws, of course, right paw, left paw.
Yep, his left paw's on the steering wheel. And basically, in this position, he's in the driving mode.
Now, was there a little bit of braking in the back to the accelerator?
Oh, he thought he might go into his third gear maybe, but...
Extraordinary sight, isn't it? Look at this.
Look at that style.
Good boy. Good boy.
Now, one of the voices you heard there is trainer Mark Vetties. Monty found his place in Mark's home and heart, and Mark joins us now. Mark, looking back at that video, God, it's a joyous thing to see him. You must be pretty sad to have lost him.
Yeah, no, he was one of those very, very special dogs. I remember I had Hercules, the old bugger dog. He was my last dog that really I remember like that. But Monty was just, he was a world beater. I didn't get 100 million tweets, but he did, so he wins, I think. Yeah, he was a great dog, yeah.
So Monty died recently. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, it was. We had a suspicion that he'd gone off his food a little bit, but everything was normal. And what actually happened was he had an aortic bleed, and he had a tumour in his right aorta. So, and he had a bleed out, and he died in his sleep. So 11 years old, that's, more than 10, which is the life expectancy. But, it's sad to lose him. He's one of those real character dogs, that he's always happy. and he was so smart, you know. Yeah.
He was bloody smart, right?
Yeah, he
and
was.
so he
In
was an
every way.
underdog, excuse the pun, a rescue dog.
He was, yeah.
So what
He
was
was
the
nearly
goal?
put down, yeah.
What was the goal in teaching him to drive? Why did you do it? What did you want to show people?
Yeah. So I mean, I've done on the SPCA ads for many years over the years, done different things, and they had Peter Vegas on as the creative, which is always dangerous because he's very creative, and he decided that the dog needed to drive without anyone in the car. Initially, I was thinking we'd be able to cheat it, but that's not possible. So so we had to teach it, and we taught 3 dogs actually. So it was a pretty fun thing to do and a pretty amazing feat. I mean, dogs are pretty amazing, animals. They're very intelligent, but of course you have to work with various things to achieve, human type behaviour. So we had a modified car, like a special needs car and so on. But he was one of those special dogs. There was 3 of them that we selected. Old Porter's still alive, and Ginny's died. But they're 10 years old, the life expectancy of a large dog, and he's 11. And so you start to, once you get over that 10, you're kind of moving into borrowed time. So it's you're always ready, but you're never ready for. You turn around and he's, just died behind the couch. It's just it was quite, it left a big hole. Yeah, he's such a special mate, Mm.
You wanted to show people that rescue dogs could be smart, right? That they were clever.
Yeah, and we did. We had a very successful global kind of, because, it went around the world, as you said. We had stations and film crews all over the world for months, It was just one of those craziest things. And it really sparked off our next whole TV series, Pound Pups, That was we were making that at the time, but that really, blew it into life and made it go global. And it was just one of those times, and he was very much the character, in the car with, flopping the old bicep out the window, such a bloody character, And you had to be careful of the accelerator. He'd love to get on that accelerator, which he did a couple of times and nearly ran us over, but that's another story.
It's just so bizarre, but it just brings joy to watch that video of him doing that. And he was obviously, as I said, a rescue pup, but he managed to weasel his way into your heart, did he, Mark? And then he became your bud for life.
He did. That's what happened with the flying dog too. I was in England and rescued him and brought him back. It's when you get close to dogs like that, and you're doing a lot of work together, for a long time, and you get very close. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful relationship. You really, he becomes, just for me, they become my teacher. It's kind of a landline into the dog world, because you get to know them so well. And they've got their own personalities and they've got their own behaviours that and some that you've trained, maybe 80, 100 behaviours he learned in his lifetime, which is, a lot of behaviours, yeah.
Really,
stuff.
Really remarkable, Mark. Really appreciate you coming on, and our sympathies, because these fur babies, they do weasel their way into our hearts, don't they?
Yes. I heard you yourself have a pup. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got a pup, so you get super attached to them, Mark. So our sympathies, and it's great. It was great to see Monty in that video and take a walk down memory lane. Thanks for joining us.
So have a good day. Catch your team. Yeah.
That is Mark Vetti, who is an exceptional dog trainer who trained Monty to actually drive a car. Check out the video online. About 150 Christchurch midwives, mothers and their supporters have marched to St George's Hospital to hand-deliver a petition to save its maternity unit from closing. The petition has been backed by more than 30,000 people, as Jean Edwards reports.
What do we want? Save St George's! When do we want it? Now!
Christchurch midwives are used to delivering babies, but this morning they delivered a petition rolled up in a pram. Mums and babies marched with them to St George's, where the private hospital's chief executive, Blair Roxburgh, was waiting to greet them. Midwife Sheena Ross told the crowd Christchurch women deserve more choices in maternity care.
We all deserve more, not fewer.
Mr Roxburgh is staying tight-lipped about the reason for the proposal or what might happen next.
It's an operational matter at the moment. We have a period of consultation and that closes tomorrow, and I'm not going to do anything that preempts that process.
New mum Anne-Marie thinks it's crazy to close St George's, which would leave the city without a primary birthing unit for women with uncomplicated pregnancies until a new one opens next year.
If I was in labour and I had to drive to Wairua or wherever it is, it would be pretty horrendous. So I think closing down services in Christchurch is madness.
Mary Ann Miller's daughter was born at St George's. She feels so strongly about its future that it might influence her plans for another baby.
I had such a good experience there, and if there's only women's to go to, that may actually factor in for me having a third, or it may even factor me having it at home.
Jess Jenkinson is due to have her second child in June. She's also a midwife who's delivered babies at St George's. She says the maternity unit's closure would heap even more pressure on Christchurch women's.
So our other primary units are Lincoln and Remuera, and a lot of women, they will just purely birth at Christchurch Women's because it's close to them, when really they're a well woman who should be birthing at a primary unit and will have much better experience at a primary unit and save the Christchurch Women's for the high-risk women that need to be there.
Sheena Ross, who organised the petition, says she's thrilled with the response and hopes it will influence St George's decision makers.
31,000 signatures, says it all, doesn't it, in the space of 3 weeks. And this is Christchurch, busy city, the only birth unit, and they're talking about closing it. How crazy is that?
St George's says it won't rush into a decision and will provide an update at the end of the month. Midwives plan to keep up the fight to save it.
Thank you, everybody!
Some more of your thoughts on supermarkets. Bill says he went to Pack and Save yesterday, bought 2 kilos of excellent apples for $2.30, 2 broccoli for $3 and a decent-sized lettuce. Bill says not a bad haul for less than $9. Someone else reckons the government benefits from the supermarket overcharging us because GST is added after profit. I don't believe they have any interest in helping us in a hurry, they say.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. An economist says the Reserve Bank has come out with a sledgehammer by raising its benchmark interest rate by 0.5 percentage point to 1.5%. Kiwi Bank Chief Economist Jared Kerr told Checkpoint he didn't think the 50 basis point hike was needed amidst drops in consumer and business confidence. He says the average $700,000 mortgage will cost an extra $15,000 a year.
Households are going to find it tougher, particularly with rising mortgage rates, other lending rates, and the rising cost of living that we're going through. I mean, the price of petrol is one thing, but there's broad-based cost pressures coming through via food and housing-related costs.
Jared Kerr expects another 50 basis point hike in May. The Prime Minister says the government must fix competition in the supermarket sector to ensure people have access to fairer food prices. The increase in the price of food is at its highest in 10 years, with prices 7.6% higher compared to March last year. Jacinda Ardern says the Commerce Commission has suggested how to fix the duopoly. She says the government is exploring if it needs to go further.
Here we can ask the question of those looking into the market themselves to say, what are the big barriers for you? In some cases, it's land acquisition and the covenants that apply. In others, it might be access to wholesalers. There are things that we can do to make this a fairer market.
The increase in the price of food is the highest since July 2011, which was partly influenced by an increase in GST. The Green Party says it's not the right time to move to the orange traffic light setting. As of midnight tonight, gathering limits, both indoors and outdoors, will go and schools will not be required to use masks. Greens co-leader James Shaw says the vaccination rates for children over 5 years old and booster rates for Māori and Pasifika aren't high enough. He says these inequities mean it's too early to move to the orange traffic light.
I mean, we've just passed 500 deaths in this country, which 2 years ago would have been completely unacceptable. So it does feel like a strange time to be stepping down the traffic light levels.
James Shaw says New Zealand should stay at the red traffic light setting until vaccination rates reach equitable levels for all ethnicities and ages. Most of State Highway 35 will close north of Gisborne as heavy rain continues to batter Tairāwhiti and Wairua. Surface flooding, slips and fallen trees have closed dozens more roads. Our Hawke's Bay Tairāwhiti reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
Waka Kotahi will close the highway between Tolaga Bay, nearly an hour north of Gisborne, and Port Tucker past the East Cape. The road will shut at 8 p.m. tonight, and the decision will be reviewed in the morning. In Hawke's Bay, contractors will continue to monitor the state highway network around Wairua, where heavy rain and high winds are also forecast. High winds are also forecast for State Highway 5 between Napier and Taupua. These roads may need to be closed if it becomes unsafe to keep them open. Tairāwhiti and Wairua are under a red rain warning until early morning.
Police say they're concerned about an increase in ram raid burglaries, mostly carried out by young people. Luxury stores Louis Vuitton and Gucci were hit on Queen Street in Auckland's CBD on Monday. Last week, a dairy in the city was ram raided and 9 young people were arrested. Waikato police have recorded $100,000 in stolen goods. Have recovered $100,000 in stolen goods and arrested 80 people since launching an investigation in February. Assistant Commissioner Richard Chambers told Checkpoint there's been an increase in ram raids throughout the country.
We're noticing some trends with these style of burglaries, particularly young people being involved, stolen cars being involved, social media being a platform which many of them are using to communicate.
Richard Chambers says the thieves are focused on stealing alcohol, cigarettes and vape equipment. New Zealand is committing almost $4.4 million towards climate change assessments. The Minister for Pacific Peoples, Aupito William Sio, made the announcement at the Our Ocean Conference, which opened in Palau today with delegates from more than 80 nations. Aupito says the funds will go to the University of the South Pacific in Suva and the University of Canterbury.
I think what you heard today was the need for authoritative data, and that's what we need to do. We've got a lot of work to do in the region, and it requires us to be able to have the proper data in order for us to make some good decisions on the way forward, because the region is faced with not just one thing, but a multiplicity of challenges.
Aupito William Sio says the framework for the fund is still being worked through. And a man has died following a workplace incident at Awapuni in Gisborne. Emergency services were called to an address on Stanley Road about 11:15 a.m. WorkSafe has been notified and police will be investigating on behalf of the coroner. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Juliet Batten, author of the Pomegranate Journal, a meditation on the challenges, surprises and blessings of growing older. Clark Peters is back with a new season of Black Music in Europe, from the 1980s to the present day. And this week's Hump Prize is Nature Boy, the beautiful photography of Olaf Peterson. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen shortly. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Former Cyclone Feli is moving to the east of the North Island, bringing gales and heavy rain to eastern areas. For Northland, Auckland and Waikato, fine apart from isolated showers for Northland until tomorrow morning. For Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, remaining rain is gradually clearing from the west today and southwesterly gales are easing. Fine tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls, localised downpours and possible thunderstorms. Southwesterly gales, possibly severe and exposed places, becoming fine tomorrow with winds gradually easing. From Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumarunui, Taihape and Wairarapa. Isolated showers, but there's scattered rain in Taihape and Wairarapa. Southerly gales in exposed places are easing this evening, becoming fine tomorrow. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, partly cloudy, isolated showers in Fiordland and along the south coast. And for the remainder of the South Island, mainly fine. Looking at Rikohu, the Chatham Islands, rain, possibly heavy with thunderstorms tomorrow, southerly gales tomorrow afternoon and evening. It's 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. At midnight tonight, the COVID traffic light flicks from red to orange. That means no more crowd limits for inside venues. The mosh pit is back and you can cut some shapes on the dance floor maskless. Yet masks are still a must in many places, including inside shops and on public transport. But schools will be left to make their own decisions about whether kids need to wear masks in class. The Education Minister, who's also the COVID response minister, says advice on ventilation ventilation and masks is being prepared for schools. While joining us now is the Auckland Primary Principals Association President, Wendy Coford. Wendy, is your phone and email blowing up about this?
No, not at all. I've not had one tweak except from you.
Is everyone pretty relaxed then?
Oh, it appears so at the moment, but we in school are going to be, we school leaders are going to have to be undertaking our risk assessments, and we'll be making any decisions in a considered and timely manner moving forward. We know each of our communities have a pretty diverse range of circumstances that they'll need to take into account as they adjust to the new setting.
Yeah, given it comes in at midnight tonight, when do you reckon schools need to make decisions by?
I think most of us will likely retain the current settings until the end of the term, which is tomorrow, and we'll make adjustments to the school operations from next terms. And schools have been working really closely with the communities over the past 2 years, and we'll continue to do so as we move forward. And, we've been constantly making adjustments for the changing levels of risks in our communities. And as we move to Orange, we'll do so again.
Do you fear that some parents might keep their kids away if there's no mask policy in the class?
I hope not, because what we're working really hard at doing at the moment is getting all of our learners back to school, and we'll certainly be reassuring our parents about the mitigation measures we will have in place in Orange level, especially those that we need that sort of makes sense as we head into winter. So strong communication and reassurances to our community will be needed about the health measures and what we'll have in place to reduce risk. We know we'll have well-ventilated spaces, good hand hygiene, cough and sneeze etiquette, and there may be some physical distancing if needed, especially for big assemblies, and if anyone's sick, stay home.
When you talk about ventilation, do you have the units required, ventilation units? Are they available? Who's paying for them? Do you have
the ministry? I have mine on order. So the ministry emailed principals in our area recently, and I know mine will arrive at the beginning of next term. But my board have also bought a couple of extras just to have in places like staff rooms, for example, where there are a lot of adults likely talking and eating without masks.
And Wendy, how much does that set you back, a couple of those units?
Oh, they were a reasonable price, a couple of hundred, not majorly a major expense, but one the board thought were justified. Just as initially we bought our own resupplies of masks and even a few wraps when we needed those. But the ministry have really stepped up, and we have ventilation units arriving. We've got more CO2 monitors coming, which is really useful because we can track CO2 emissions in classrooms and make adjustments if we need to.
Wendy, is that the case across the board at Auckland primary schools? Does everybody have their units, or are expecting them, say, in the first week of next term?
I think the ministry have taken a sort of a needs-based approach. Like I was told there was 50 or 60 schools in various parts of New Zealand who had ventilation issues that needed to be solved sooner rather than later. So those schools received the units sooner than those of us that have got good windows and good natural ventilation. We've used our CO2 monitors and checked all spaces, and we know we get a really good airflow. And if we see our little monitors, moving up a wee bit, not that that's happened, we can vacate rooms to get some fresh air into those spaces. In winter will be a little bit trickier. We will need to monitor them a little bit more closely, but we can still heat rooms really early in the morning, have the rooms nice and toasty, and then open windows, not to a huge extent, but just to get that airflow through. So we've we've done our own sort of analysis of our spaces and rooms. So Auckland probably would be one of the later place schools would be the one on the end of the supply, I would imagine, given our circumstances, and we're not quite at the colder temperatures that those schools down south are currently.
Sure. So given the change midnight tonight, have you yet seen any advice around masks at Orange for schools? Has the ministry given you that yet?
While we know that at Orange masks are no longer required at school, we know that wearing a mask is a key health measure and slows the spread of COVID-19. And I would imagine that a lot of people will continue to wear a mask in indoor spaces in Orange over winter. Obviously the masks will lower the risk of COVID, flu, measles and any other airborne diseases. And also it's being especially kind to those around them. Manaakitanga is all about being kind to others. It may be that we need to, and we'll look at our sort of risk analysis, it may be that from time to time, if we're having really big assemblies, that we may ask parents to wear masks, or if there are surges in the community and we may get more of those sort of a bit further down the track, then we may need to bring in masks again into classrooms. So while we're moving to Orange now, we can't discount the fact that we may go back to red at some time in the future.
Appreciate your time, Wendy. Thanks for joining us. That is Wendy Coford, who is the Auckland Primary Principals Association President. Confirmation of the move to the orange light setting comes as a relief to the country's top netballers and the sports administrators. The National Premiership is played indoors, which means it was the lone major competition unable to lift crowd limits when outdoor restrictions were dropped late last month. While the likes of Super Rugby and the Women's Cricket World Cup welcomed back thousands of fans, a maximum of just 200 were allowed in the netball matches. Netball New Zealand's Jenny Wiley says although it's been a long time coming, the change will make the world of difference for the sport.
To be able to have the noise, the excitement, to be able to look after our partners and to allow the athletes to have their family and friends with them. I think it just makes such a big difference, and it certainly will help the teams financially as well.
The financial impact will perhaps be the most welcome. Wiley says although some franchises have been creative, for most, staying afloat has been a big strain.
It has been probably the hardest year yet in terms of the financial impact, but also the impact on the welfare of players, management and umpires as well, because everyone is on tenterhooks. This does provide some light at the end of the tunnel.
But Wiley is also staying cautious with more than half a dozen premiership matches postponed through the first 5 rounds. She says the tournament's very unpredictable. The first game with unlimited crowds will be on Saturday afternoon when the Tactics host the Northern Stars in Christchurch. It is almost 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Water New Zealand says it will take decades and cost a fortune to replace ageing asbestos pipes carrying our drinking water. New Zealand has over 88,000 kilometres of water pipes, enough to go up and down the length of the country 55 times. And according to an Otago University study released yesterday, around 9,000 kilometres of them contain asbestos. Neva Chittick has more.
No asbestos pipes have been installed in New Zealand since the 1990s, yet replacing the existing ones with alternatives would cost over $2 billion. Water New Zealand's chief executive, Gillian Blythe, says asbestos pipes aren't as resilient as initially thought, especially in wetter ground.
There are a number of factors that will impact asbestos pipes, and in fact any pipe, and that reflects, what's happening above ground. Is it that there has been a change in transport on a particular trunk road, which the pipe is going underneath? Has there been an earthquake? Has there been a slip?
Ms Blythe says pipe erosion also causes leaks and contamination, with 20% of the country's drinking water lost every year.
It has been the case for a while, and it is extraordinarily high, and that's why we need to be able to spend money to fix the infrastructure deficit that we've got, because by doing the renewals we will be able to reduce the number of leaks.
The Ministry of Health says there is no consistent evidence that ingested asbestos is harmful. In a statement, a spokesperson says extensive international research does not clearly show any adverse health risks. Ray McMillan, head of regulatory for the new national drinking water regulator, Taumata Arawai, agrees.
We've been engaged with the Ministry of Health in terms of drafting the latest version of the drinking water standards for New Zealand, and we also engaged with an expert international panel. And certainly no one's raised any concerns around the need for us to test for asbestos or to amend the standards to do that.
But there are still rules in place to keep pipes up to scratch. And if new research came to light, Mr McMillan says the rules could be swiftly adjusted.
What we will expect to see going forward is through the development of the Drinking Water Safety Plan, which is a requirement for every drinking water supplier, for them to demonstrate how they will go about making sure that they understand and are in fact keeping those distribution networks fit for purpose.
New Plymouth District Council's head of Three Waters, Mark Hall, says most councils are already making plans to replace the affected pipes.
We are investing something like $280 million in our water network over the next 10 years, and a big chunk of that is in replacing pipes, and of that, asbestos cement is one of those materials that we are certainly targeting.
But local government minister Nanaia Mahuta says the study's findings are concerning, and it strengthens the case for the Three Waters reforms.
We have to do better in terms of greater assurance for the reliability of healthy drinking water. When you have aged infrastructure, it is evidence to say that there may be some health issues as a result. But we want to fix it, and that's why the Three Waters Initiative is so important.
It is expected to take at least 30 years to repair or replace all the remaining asbestos pipes.
Russia's Vladimir Putin says peace talks are at a dead end amid accusations of war crimes. More evidence is emerging of atrocities committed against civilians, and the US President Joe Biden has now used the word genocide to describe Russia's war in Ukraine. But Putin says the evidence is fake and insists his goals are noble. The ABC's Sean Rubenstein-Dunlop has more.
Across the city of Chernihiv, families queue all day for food. We visit a car dealership which has been transformed into an aid centre. We've been waiting 6 hours, says a man at the front of the queue. I don't know what we can get here. We'd be grateful for anything. Inside, we watch as a boy fills a box with cartons of milk, bottles of water, a half loaf of bread and potatoes. After 5 weeks hiding underground in hunger, it's finally safe to come out for food. There was no bread and water, says a woman here. We had to go to the well and queue for bread for hours. People here risked relentless bombardment to find food. This city was encircled by Russian forces with no power, light or running water. Attacks destroyed homes, schools, hospitals and water and gas facilities, hitting civilians with brutal tactics honed in Syria and Chechnya. Dr. Vladislav Kuchar runs the region's biggest hospital. It's peppered with holes from artillery fire and its shattered windows are boarded up. Doctors were working day and night without power, water and heating when it was attacked. Dr. Kuchar was inside the emergency department when it was destroyed.
The hospital was shaking, the corridors were filled with a dense fog from white dust. Patients were screaming. Despite the direct risk to their lives, the doctors didn't leave, knowing that if they suspended the operations, the patients wouldn't survive. It was true heroism.
He says the attack wasn't accidental.
Our hospital was specifically targeted. There were no military units around. I believe this was all on purpose to cause panic, to finish our people off with direct attacks against ordinary civilians. Even civilians standing in line to buy bread were killed here.
More than 100 Ukrainian health facilities have been attacked in Ukraine in what the World Health Organization describes as an intentional campaign. Still, patients with missing limbs fill this hospital's outdated wards. Valentin Osupenko has burns and shattered bones. He says his house was hit with cluster bombs, which are banned by the UN because they cause random carnage. His wife Svetlana had her toe reattached after the attack, but the tally of losses for her family is long.
We have lost our future in this war. We've lost our health, our house, our car, everything we had. We had a very good life. We can't bring it back. I don't understand it. We had no significant infrastructure or military units around. I believe they were targeting civilians.
Those who lost their lives here are now buried in makeshift graveyards. There's no room in morgues and cemeteries. And as Russia now prepares for a major assault on Ukraine's southeast, more atrocities are mounting by the day.
As 50 Defence Force troops fly out to Europe, the Defence Minister says it's not out of the question that New Zealand could have boots on the ground in Ukraine in future. Pene Henare says currently they're staying out, but Cabinet is open to reviewing that. Jordan Bond was at Whenuapai Air Base this morning.
Just after 8 this morning. Lifts off. A 57-year-old Hercules C-130 aircraft with 9 Defence Force staff on board heads to Europe. The current mission, 2 months long, to help move aid into Ukraine, but only from a distance. Here's the Defence Minister, Pene Henare.
We've made it clear in the mandate that we've sourced from Cabinet and Government that we are to not enter into Ukraine. But of course, as the Prime Minister's already said, Cabinet will continue to monitor the situation and will remain agile enough to make decisions as required.
As well as the 9 on the plane, another 41 are heading over on commercial flights in the next few days. The 50 will travel around Europe, delivering equipment and supplies to distribution centres, but will not go into Ukraine. The Air Force's Auckland Base Commander, Group Captain Andy Scott, says the staff deployed have a wide range of skills.
Enough aircrew to make up an entire second crew so that we can sustain a high rate of effort. We also take some maintenance personnel on board that can go and just help if there's any minor things that need doing, help with refuelling, logistics support teams, and then we have the intelligence staff as well.
The 5 Air Force C-130s will be retired in the next 2 years. At one point in 2019, not a single one was available because they all needed maintenance or upgrades. Andy Scott is confident the plane is up to the job.
We've got every confidence that the C-130s are up to the job. Although, as you know, they are an older aircraft now. With the aircraft that's going actually is a 1965 version. It's a little bit like Grandad's axe, that there's been lots of things replaced over the time, which actually brings it right up to date with 2022 standards.
Pene Henare says this is a proportionate response from New Zealand to what is a blatant attack on a sovereign country.
Our counterparts and from our partners around the world is extremely positive for New Zealand's contribution. I've already made it clear, and the Prime Minister has too, that our contribution spans military, spans economic and also humanitarian. So the words of Secretary Wallace, who's coordinating out of the UK, was that New Zealand's contribution is significant if you consider our place in the world.
The plane won't get there for 5 days, likely arriving in the UK on Monday.
A gunman remains at large in New York after detonating a smoke bomb and opening fire on a train as it approached a subway station during rush hour. 10 people were shot and almost 30 people were injured and were treated at New York hospitals. The local police commissioner, Kayshant Searle, says it's lucky the attack wasn't much worse, and police have said they're looking for a man named Frank R. James in relation to the attack.
Clearly, this individual boarded the train and was intent on violence. We are conducting a highly coordinated investigation that includes NYPD detectives, the FBI NYPD Joint Terrorism Task Force, and the ATF. The suspect is a dark-skinned male and was wearing a neon orange vest and a gray-colored sweatshirt. We do have a person of interest in this investigation.
With more from New York, here's the BBC's Nada Tawfiq.
In an instant, the rush of the morning commute turned into a race to safety. On this subway car, New Yorkers went into a state of shock after a man wearing a green construction vest, a hooded sweatshirt, and a gas mask detonated a smoke bomb and then began opening fire. The attacker fled the scene to the sounds of people's screams and the sight of some collapsing on the platform, bloodied and wounded.
At 25th Street, we're all told to get off. There was people screaming for medical assistance. It was just a scary moment. Everyone was packed together, and I didn't know what happened until after.
I saw a lot of people coming out of the train station, screaming, yelling for help. I saw a lady she was shot right in her leg.
She was shot in her leg?
Yeah, and she was screaming for help.
A massive emergency response from the NYPD to the FBI flooded the area. Authorities are still hunting for the suspect, whose motive remains unknown. Investigators are combing through the crime scene and nearby surveillance cameras for any clues.
New York has seen a rise in shootings. Up until now, they were local, isolated incidents. But this, the first mass indiscriminate shooting in recent times, affects the sense of security of every New Yorker. Commuters were just emerging from the pandemic and hoping for a return to normal.
We say no more.
No more mass shootings. No more disrupting lives. No more creating heartbreak for people just trying to live their lives as normal New Yorkers. It has to end, and it ends now.
New York is counting itself lucky that no one died, but this will once again put the focus on public safety.
Somalia has launched its first women-only newsroom, creating a rare opportunity for female journalists in the conservative nation. Bilin, which is funded by the UN, says it wants to highlight underrepresented voices and influence the news agenda. The BBC's Anna Aslam has more.
According to the World Bank, women make up less than a third of the workforce in Somalia. Those who work in the media face multiple challenges, from being underpaid and denied promotion to bullying and sexual harassment. And the male-dominated newsrooms translate to news programs that largely ignore women's issues. Until now. Bilin means bright and clear in the Somali language, and its founders say they'll stay true to its meaning by shedding light on underreported topics such as sexual-based violence and women's medical issues. Fatih Mohammed Ahmed is the deputy editor of the newsroom.
All the Somali media companies, the directors, the workers, most of them are men, and they don't like female journalists. They say, no, don't do this job. We don't care about that. If you are a strong person, if you have a decision, no one can stop you. We need to share with Somali community untold stories.
Bilin will go on air later this month and will produce content for TV, radio and online media. The team is currently made up of 6 women, but it could grow bigger. The newsroom will offer internships to female journalism students at 2 universities in the capital Mogadishu, where it's based. Bilin has been launched as a 1-year pilot project, but the UN says it's confident it will become a permanent setup and may even be extended into Somalia's regions. The UN will also provide long-term training and mentorship for female journalists in the country from established Somali and international broadcasters, including Al Jazeera's Mohammed Ado and the BBC's Lise Doucette and Razia Iqbal.
And finally, a bit of feedback on the story from Nick on Rotorua emergency accommodation. I'm a local. This person says the situation is not great, sadly. It's tricky, but we need real permanent solutions to housing. There is clearly a mismatch in houses being built versus the numbers in temporary tourism type accommodation. There is sadly a growing feeling locally that the government has dumped this on this amazing region. That is about all we've got time for this evening. Now, the late news team is going to keep you updated throughout the evening. And if you missed anything from the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a Pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, while the first Aussie tourists came in, first up headed to departures to talk to those leaving New Zealand. Kaua e wariwari te atatiro I a mātou kōrero. Just a reminder, heaps of stories and videos on our webpage. Do check them out. Have a great night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. Heavy rain continues to batter Tairāwhiti and Wairua, with most of State Highway 35 to close north of Gisborne tonight from 8 p.m. A leading economist is worried about how households will cope with increased mortgage rates and the rising cost of living after the Reserve Bank raised its benchmark interest rate today. Food prices have had their biggest jump in a decade, and the Prime Minister says the government must fix competition in the supermarket sector. New Zealand is committing almost $4.4 million